Thank you all for your patience as we manage some of our tech issues. And for our TPZ members, if I can ask you all to go on mute. Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. This is our regular meeting of the Town Plan and Zoning Commission that I call to order today on Monday, May 3rd at 6:41 p.m. My name is Rob Klee. I'm the chair of Woodbridge Town Plan and Zoning. Other members that are with us here tonight are Yoni Zamir, Paul Schatz, Jeff Kennedy, and hopefully Andrew Skolnick as we manage some of our tech issues. And for our TPZ members, if I can ask you all to go on mute. And thank you, Al, for the logistics. I do see Andrew seems like he's on his way in, which is great. So as you all know, we're operating remotely under the auspices of the governor's executive orders to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. And we thank you all in advance for your patience with the tech. And I ask you, if you haven't already, to mute yourselves unless you're speaking. We do have a busy agenda tonight, which has been posted on the town website. We're going to start with a public hearing on an application for a special permit for the manufacturing of artwork submitted by Neoset Designs at 140 Bradley Road. Then we'll have our work session, and I think I'm going to move the order so we can talk about Neoset Designs first and potentially resolve that one, and then have our first work session on the 2 Orchard Road application for a zoning regulation amendment and an amendment to the town plan of conservation and development. So that's going to be the bulk of our time once we get into our work session. And then we'll have some additional reports and approval of minutes and those sorts of things. So I see that we have with us Jonathan Brand on behalf of Neoset Designs. I believe you are able to go right ahead and present on behalf of our applicant. Thank you.
Okay, hi, can everyone hear me? I'm Jonathan Brand of Neoset Designs. So we're here to apply for a special exception to allow manufacturing of artwork at 140 Bradley Road. So Neoset Designs, we are a digital fabrication studio, formerly of Brooklyn, New York. So we were in business doing the same thing in Brooklyn Navy Yards for 11 years. We mainly specialize in the robotic milling in stone and metal. And so the move to Woodbridge has kind of condensed us to really focus on that. The property at 140 Bradley Road is kind of ideal for us. It has about 5,000 square feet of really high ceiling industrial warehouse, and then 4,500 square feet of what is classified as office space, but for us, it's perfect storage and office. So the hours of our business kind of varies. So many of our clients are extremely high profile artists all over the world. So right now we're doing 2 projects, one for artists in China, one for artists in Korea. So this kind of causes us to keep really late hours because we have to communicate with them and they're completely opposite of us. So a lot of times someone is there 24 hours a day, not the same person, obviously. Now the building as situated is kind of perfect. We really don't have to make any alterations. We're just asking for a small comparatively to the large parking area, outdoor storage that we would store mainly large blocks of stone. The parking is more than ample. I mean, we can park over 20 cars in that lot, and we have currently 3 full-time employees, and we're seeking to hire more, but mainly we keep about 5 employees. This is my first time presenting to you guys, so if there's, I'm sure there'll be questions, or if I've left things out, I'm here to answer your questions.
Great, Jonathan. That was a very nice presentation. All of our members of the commission have also received your submission, which has also been posted on the town website. Chris, was there any public comment received in your office? So there was no public comment received, written comment received, which due to our rules had to be received by this morning. I think I'll go for public comment first and then open it up to questions from the commission members, Jonathan, if that's all right with you.
Yes.
And so I'm going to ask if there are any members of the public here in our attendees who will have to digitally raise your hand if you would like to speak about the application for a special permit, a special exception for 140 Bradley Road. That's the purpose of these public hearings, is to listen to comments of the public. Any member of the public will have up to 3 minutes to ask their question and offer their brief statements for the record. But as you know, our TPC members and actually the applicant are not going to answer any direct questions that the public may have. So the public is just putting their questions onto the record. And those in combination with anything that was received in town, though there wasn't any, will help guide our decision on this application. So that was an attempt for me to see if anyone had any hand raises in our attendee list on this special exception that is in front of us. I'm seeing none, right? Chris, you don't see any?
I don't see any, nope.
Okay, I'll do a going once and a going twice. And I don't see any hand raises from the public. So thank you for that. I now will turn it over to our commission members if you have questions of the applicant.
Chris, any concerns on your part or on the part of any member of the town staff?
No, this is an ideal location for something like this. It's snugged up right against West Rock, and it's at a dead end. It's a perfect use for that kind of site.
Agreed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Any other questions from commission members for our applicant? Mm-hmm. So I guess one question I have is, I have a sense. I'm assuming you like this site because it's very large, sort of tall areas. What are the sort of sizes of the bulk materials? Are they coming in via truck? What is the sort of logistics of moving things in and out of your site?
Yeah, so we have varied sizes of stones. So we mostly deal in weight. So the weights make them sound massive. So some of our stones are like 8 tons. So they're moved by, a flatbed truck. But an 8-ton stone is like probably 5 to 6 feet tall. So it's like the size of a large man, but it weighs way more because it's, granite. Or we have a stone project in the pipeline, the one that will actually ship to Korea, that's soapstone. So that's a light stone. So that stone can be bigger, way, so an 8-ton stone would be bigger. But mostly it's a flatbed truck or like a tilt and load truck that comes. And, when we have a stone that big, we're going to be working on it for like a month. So it's not like they're coming and going constantly. We currently have 4 robots, only one that handles that big of stone. So, we have most of our work is like stones in the 300-pound range. So they're like, a 300-pound stone is like, 2 feet wide by maybe 30 inches tall. Not that big. But as far as, the traffic, the nice thing that's ideal is like we share a property with West Rock Materials. So they're, the same size trucks come 10 times a day from them. Will be coming maybe once a month to us. So we kind of thought, so as far as traffic, we're not really adding to what's there.
Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that. Other members of the commission with questions or thoughts? Yoni, if you're talking, we're not hearing you.
Sorry, I'm using my phone. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I would say that it seems ideal given the location.
I would concur. Anyone else? All right. Seeing none, I'll go once more to the public. Going once, going twice. I see no hands raised from the public either, so I believe that we can close our public hearing if I have a motion.
So moved.
I think it was moved and seconded by Paul. Moved by Andrew, seconded by Paul. Chris, all in favor of closing the public hearing on our application for a special exception at 140 Bradley Road by Neoset Designs. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Seeing none. So our motion to close the public hearing. We will then transfer that over to our work session, which I believe, Chris, we can go to right now, correct?
That is correct.
So thank you, Jonathan, for your participation. We now go into our work session, so we're actually not allowed to ask you any more questions. We just deliberate amongst ourselves and we make a decision. But hold on, and because if I had to guess, we're going to be pretty quick on this. So moving over to our work session, any thoughts or reactions to this special permit application from our TPC members?
So I'll make a motion for approval of the submitted application.
It's been moved by Andrew.
Second.
Seconded by Paul, but everyone else wanted to as well. Any discussion on the application other than it seems ideally suited for the place that it's going, and it's great to see a new a business leaving New York and coming to Connecticut.
Agreed. Good thing.
Any further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor of the motion as presented, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? So it's approved. So Jonathan, thank you very much for coming. Well done. Nicely presented, and good luck as you make that move and start this venture here in Woodbridge.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time, and we're excited to be here.
Great.
Great. Thanks. Alrighty. So going back to our agenda, and before I do, any word from Larry, Chris?
I go into my emails. Not seeing anything from him.
Do you have can you give him a call or reach out to him?
Hang on. I will do so. And I'll mute myself again.
Thank you, Chris.
Larry said that he had a very bad fall about a week ago, and at the moment he is just in bed and will watch the proceedings, but will not be able to participate this evening.
Oh, thank you very much, Chris. Is there anything we can do to? Maybe we'll talk offline. To send him something.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's tough. It is being recorded. Our deliberations here. So I think we will go ahead. Alrighty. So I'd like to start and just kind of reorient ourselves or sort of bring us back to where we were from last time we were all together at our last meeting at the beginning of April. And first, just make a reminder to ourselves and to the public that's might be listening in that we are still actively working and deliberating on this 2 Orchard Road application. So no members of the public, none of the applicants should have any direct communications with any of the members of the TPZ at any time. So we are continuing in that sort of space where there's no contact with us, no emails, etc. This obligation continues throughout our entire deliberation phase. And as a reminder, we have, and Attorney Dubuque, you can correct me if I get any of this wrong, we have 65 days from the close of the public hearing with which to have these deliberations and render our decision as the TPZ. All of these deliberations will be conducted here in public in these open proceedings that are open to the public, the applicants, etc. But recognize that the applicants and other members of the public and Attorney Herbst and his clients will all be muted. They will not be allowed to participate anymore. That was what the public hearing part was for. This is now our time to deliberate amongst ourselves. So we've been digesting this information for the last month or so, and those are all things that are going to inform our meeting tonight. So I'd like to offer a few sort of framing thoughts as we begin our conversation. Paul.
Before you do that, can I just ask, how are we going to conduct this is it going to be over multiple meetings, one meeting, special meeting, regular meeting? I just want to get a kind of a sense for what our plan is.
Well, so that's something definitely for us to all discuss together. I think we have, it's 7:00 now. I want to be respectful of people's time. We have plenty of time today. There may be some things that we want to either ask our consultant, who is our consultant, to help us with or work through, or our attorney. So we definitely have to be done, and Attorney Dubuque, you can sort of fill me in, by next regular meeting would be the last, if we were keeping on a regular schedule. If we wanted to schedule something that's between now and then, we could, in the form of a special meeting just for continued deliberations on these topics. Attorney Dubuque, did I miss anything there?
You are completely correct.
Great, thank you.
So we can offer comments at this meeting as well as our June, whatever the date is, meeting.
Yes, although we do need to maybe look at the calendar because we're normally the first Monday of the month. The first Monday of June would be June 7th, and whether we'll get confirmation that is still within the 65-day window from our
closing the public hearing.
Our closing the public hearing. But yes, so Paul, the idea here is I think we should have the beginning of a conversation tonight. My guess is we won't reach a resolution. It's also unfortunate because we're missing Larry, that it'd be nice to have him part of these as well. So I don't want to lose his valued input. And there's plenty to go over tonight and sort of walk through and sort of get. My goal for tonight will be to try to do this in a systematic way that we sort of talk about all the things in front of us. Paul, do you have anything else, or else I'm going to continue with that?
I'm sorry, Rob. I've got one more question.
Sure.
So just so that I'm clear, and maybe this is a question for our attorney. So we have an application before us. Are we obligated to take an up or down vote specifically on that application? And then the sub question would be, can we propose something else besides what was offered in the application and is that part of this process?
So, Paul, you're stealing my thunder because those were the things I was going to walk through in just a moment.
Rob, as usual, I am sorry. I should have yielded to your expertise and experience, so I will be quiet now.
It's okay, but save that question in case it's not fully clear. So I was going to start. You're right, Paul. So we have in front of us just sort of some framing questions. What's in front of us? There are two applications for amendments. One amendment to our Plan of Conservation Development, one amendment to our zoning regulations, both submitted at the same time by the applicants. The applicants are 2 Orchard Road. That's how we've been colloquially calling them. But what is 2 Orchard Road? It's actually just an illustrative sketch of what could be built if the town approved and adopted the applicant's amendments as they are. And that was presented as here's what could be built under the proposed amendments from the applicants. Just for the legal folks, the governing statute we've established, I believe, through our public hearing process, that is Connecticut General Statutes 8-2. But we've also talked about some other statutes that are in this same space, and we have our attorney here to help us through those other statutes. And Paul, here to your question, what are our options? What is it that we can do as our Planning and Zoning Commission? There are 3 options. 1, we can adopt what was submitted to us in its entirety as option 1. 2, we can deny what was submitted to us in its entirety. Or 3, as you were alluding to, Paul, we can adopt revised amendments and reasonable revisions to what has been presented to us. So those are our 3 options, either a yes, a no, or an adoption with revisions that are reasonable. So those are the 3 things that are on the table that we're going to really, I think that's where we're going to spend a lot of our time in discussion. So the record, I want to talk a little bit about that because it is substantial. And for those who are listening at home and watching along, it is all available on the town's website. These are the documents. What can we use to help us make our decision? It's only the things that are in the record. And these, the public record. There's a lot there. And it's been developed pretty extensively over the last few months. And I sort of categorize them in a few, I think it's kind of scary. It came up with like 8 different categories. There is the applicant's submissions. That's the initial, that includes the big sort of original filing that came into us that we all have copies for us. That's there, but it's also their letters, their additional briefs, and their PowerPoint presentations that they made during the course of the public hearing. Then we have materials from the participants that were represented by Attorney Herbst, who also similarly had briefs, documents, and PowerPoint presentations. To me, that's sort of group 2. Then we have a large group 3, which has all of our public comments, and we have 2 flavors of those. We have our written comments, all of which are available on online in the website, and the oral testimony, which has all been recorded and is also recorded and available. So that was group 3, or the public comments, which we did get quite a bit of. Then we have what I call sort of agency letters, and we got a number of letters written to us from the South Central regional SCROG, the South Central Region of Governments, sort of our coalition or our group of towns. We got things from the Regional Water Authority, the West River Water Association, from the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and I believe I may be missing one, maybe NVCOG, which I'm not sure what, Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments, if I'm guessing that acronym. So we have a bunch of different sort of agency or sort of agency type letters. We then have another category. We have reports from 3 different professional planners, from Mr. Poland, Mr. Miller, and Mr. Chalder. Mr. Chalder is the only one that we hired. The other 2 are from different participants. We then had, if you recall, a subset of reports from engineers on septic systems and how they're designed and calculated and built. And I'm referring there to the Trinkhouse report and the Criscuolo reports on those regard. Then we have what I'll sort of broadly group into the discussions and kind of oral testimony and debates that we've had over the course of our public hearings, often with our questions to the applicants and participants and whatnot. So those are not things written down, but those are the things that were part of our public hearing discussions when we were asking questions. And then last, I will have a group which I might call reference material, which are the utilities map that we actually asked Chris Sullivan to create for us. We have water quality classification maps, we have soils maps, and I'll also include in that sort of group the framework that Mr. Chalder sort of created for us that kind of was that spreadsheet that sort of mapped out our different zones and what is currently allowed and what the applicants are asked for. So that's a lot. That's a lot of material for which we can sort of systematically go through that and sort of get the things from what I want to hear from you tonight is the things that stood out, the things that you found persuasive, interesting, worth further discussion about all those different materials that are in our record. Last, we do have at our disposal during our deliberations our attorney, Attorney Dubuque, and we also have Mr. Chalder. He is our consultant. We can ask them questions so long as the topic is a topic that was already in the record. So we can't start adding new things. We can't go off on tangents. We have to really stay focused on the things that we're exploring in the record. If we have a question about something in the record, we can ask our advisors for their advice. So Attorney Dubuque, did I kind of cover the basics of what is in front of us?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm open to suggestions because this is a lot to go through and make sure we all have opportunities to talk about it and be, but I hope to be a little systematic. I do want to get your impressions and reactions though, and maybe if we start sort of going through those different categories of materials, is that a good sort of place to start and sort of way to start, starting with the applicant and their presentations to us? We can do it that sort of way if that's helpful. But let me pause there and get your reactions.
I said I'd be quiet, but I think it's a fine way to proceed, Mr. Chairman.
Well, you don't have to be quiet. Now's the time actually where you're not supposed to be quiet. We're actually so let's sort of start in, and I guess happy to hear your reactions, impressions, your take, so to speak, on. Let's start with the applicant's materials, either their sort of written submissions or the different PowerPoints or presentations made to us. So let's start there.
Rob, where are we starting in the group one?
In group one, which I'm sort of characterizing as the applicant's sort of general materials, their submission.
So I'll say, without comment at this point as to the merits of any particular argument, that the presentation as a whole was thorough and excellent and commensurate with the size of the legal team that prepared it, including the volunteer labor portion of that legal team.
Thank you, Andrew. Any other sort of initial reactions or thoughts about the submission?
I will make a couple of comments. While I do agree with what Andy just said, I was disappointed, and I remained that way throughout, that I felt like it was turned into a referendum on race rather than the merits of the application. And I thought it didn't need to be. Again, it's their prerogative how they want to bring action forth, but I was really disappointed how many times I counted the word exclusionary in their written presentation as well as their oral presentations. And frankly, I didn't believe it at any place in the presentation. It was veiled attempt to call current and previous members of the TPZ racist, as well as the entire town, which I found grossly inappropriate. However, their presentation on actual regulations I found to be thoughtful and thought-provoking, and I wish that's where they focus their energy, because nobody wants to sit for as many hours as we did and essentially be antagonized with veiled comments of racism. So while I do agree that the presentation was well thought out and cited, etc., I was disappointed at how it came across, especially to the general public, because this could have been handled a lot differently, in my humble opinion.
Thank you, Paul. Others? Jeff or Yoni, do you have? Jeff, go right ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to add a little bit to what Paul just said, but joining in this idea of a framework first. So I thought I'd mention three sort of topics. This is kind of obvious, but just speaking as a commission member, I found it difficult with the COVID setting to go through such a complex and comprehensive application. It was difficult to do it completely online without people meeting in person and absent some of the human connection that I think helps us on these commissions. But I just found that to be a little bit different, a little harder. It's harder to communicate and looking at a computer screen, absent some of the one-on-one interactions we get together and we have as a group when applicants come in. Further, especially with such a complicated application, I do want members of the public, and we all know this as commission members, but we have some material limitations in how much we can't research, or fact check what has come in. We haven't talked to one another about this application. We haven't talked to friends or families and outside folks and so forth. So you're kind of like a little bit of an island as a commission member during the past several months. And that's fair based on the rules and the process that we have. But I find that a little bit, it's just a little bit difficult, I think, for commission members. And then the final thing, which sort of touches a little bit on Paul's comments about racism, and that was a little bit of a surprise. And as I moved through the past few months to understand the framework of how they applied to us, they didn't come in with a very persuasive approach. So they didn't come in trying to negotiate or further advance housing issues or trying to turn us to their maybe point of view or show us different ways about thinking about our zoning. It didn't come in as a persuasive application. It felt to me a little bit like it came in like an indictment, so it was something where they weren't trying to move a town to do something differently than they used to do. They just kind of wanted to indict us. And I found that a little bit hard and had to set that aside, during the months to listen carefully to everything that they had to say. But as time went by, I didn't see it so much as an application or an indictment, but maybe a little bit more as a business plan by especially capable and possibly crafty developer who possibly is using some racial issues to develop or find more housing inventory, if you will, for a variety of different reasons, but possibly using a race agenda to maybe maneuver that or to advance it. So all of these things, from COVID to some of our limitations, make this a very difficult application. So those were some of the things that I was thinking about.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate those comments. Yoni, would you like to offer anything as we're sort of starting off with the applicant's sort of broad presentation?
Can you hear me? I find everybody's comments thus far very, very thoughtful, and I appreciate hearing them. You know, I consider all of you colleagues, and you know, we're all coming from slightly different perspectives on this, but I thought that the application was, yes, very, very thorough and wide, you know, wide, far-reaching. I thought they did a fine job of, you know, responding to the questions that we put to them. And I agree that I think in some senses it's difficult to put aside the at times heavy-handed, you know, rhetoric that I think has been a part of it, and in the application and in the presentation, I think sometimes it's been a little over the top, but that's the way it goes with an issue like this, I guess. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Yoni. And I guess I also will echo Yoni's sentiments that I appreciate all of your sort of initial reactions so far, and frankly, I've appreciated your patience and your listening skills throughout these last few months. And you're right, Jeff, we are presented with this is not our typical application, but it's also atypical in that, and I think you hinted at this, Jeff, that most applications come in looking to do something, and we often have that discussion, and we're trying to come to solutions that work. That wasn't. That didn't seem, even though that is normal operations for our planning and zoning commission, and frankly, across the state, that applicants come in, you have those discussions, you see. Sometimes it's like today's special permit application, which sails through. Sometimes we have debates and we ask for changes, we ask for modifications. That wasn't this one, and potentially a missed opportunity, because I think for myself at least, I would have welcomed sort of those sorts of conversations about what is possible. But we can still do that because we do have that option amongst the three to make reasonable changes and alterations to the proposal that's been put before us. Now, the proposal that's been put before us has, when you put aside there are some lengthy sort of legal pieces to this submission that are probably not directed at us. They're directed at a future reviewer of what we do. But when you focus in on what they're asking for and what they highlight, that there seems to be more opportunity for us to have increased diversity of housing stock, increase types of housing in different parts of our community. And for those parts of the presentation and where we got into those sorts of details, I was really appreciative of the applicants' ideas and the things they put forth, their ability to sort of bring what they've seen as best practices elsewhere into our conversation. So I'm appreciative of those parts of their application. Other reactions on the applicant's presentation, or should we? And I'll pause there. Is this an okay, again, or is this an okay way to proceed? Do we want to talk about the presentation by Attorney Herbst? Do we want to and sort of move from there into public comment, and what are our views on that? I just want to pause and make sure that you're okay sort of going through sort of those things step by step. Okay, that sounds good. So Attorney Herbst's presentation, representing a few folks who are in and around the Orchard Road area, who would like to offer some thoughts on either the presentation or the materials that they placed in our record?
I have no problem with an opening comment. So I didn't fully understand his role or his team's role, and I'm still not sure I fully understand all that he presented, other than in my very simplified, simple mind, I thought he was saying it's okay, just not in this particular neighborhood where my clients reside. And maybe it's an oversimplification and I'm being too blunt, but that was my takeaway. Was there's an awful lot of conversation, but it just seemed like the end game was Woodbridge should definitely do this, just don't put it at Orchard Road or perhaps in this area of town.
Thank you, Paul. I'm sorry, Yoni, I may have gone over you.
No, you can never go over anyone. You're the chairman, so you automatically. Even Paul, you can even talk over Paul. It's not easy. I agree with that, and I felt like I stretched to really try and hear something. Respectfully to him, I felt like, even more respectfully to the clients that he represents, who are our neighbors. I understand the concern and the fear that I think that they were the very valid concern and fear that they were expressing, but unfortunately, I did not hear from attorney. I already forgot his name. Herbst. It wasn't a memorable presentation. If you asked me to summarize his presentation in 2 sentences, it would be just like Paul said: don't do it. Don't do it there. This isn't the way we do it in Connecticut, and don't change it. And by the way, I'm an attorney representing clients, if you know what that means. That's what I got from Attorney Arms. And to be honest, that disappointed me. And I was even surprised when I heard his expert, his consultant, essentially, if I were to summarize what that consultant said, I heard his consultant basically say, yeah, Mr. Poland is correct. And everything that he has asserted is correct, and I pretty much agree. That was my takeaway. I'll be completely honest with you. And I was awake for all of this. So I did not hear Attorney Herbst make a compelling case as to why there might be other compelling reasons, certainly, but Attorney Herbst didn't make them. I'm sorry to say. And that's not an attack on him personally. I think that's just the material he's working with. And maybe some of it is political. Maybe that's, his views. So.
Thanks, Yoni. Andrew or Jeff, while we're still on the topic of the Herbst materials and presentation.
Well, I think the attorney was trying to say that, I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but, I did think that that people that he was representing left room for Woodbridge to make a greater effort at becoming more compliant with existing legislation. I'm not an attorney, but I think that he was trying to say, look, what are other ways can we offer more affordable housing or different housing initiatives to open additional housing in Woodbridge, but maybe not this way right at that location. And also getting a little bit to the language that came in from the applicant. I think maybe what he was trying to say is do it your own way, Woodbridge. Maybe Woodbridge as a town can offer additional housing opportunities or affordable housing that might not be what was coming in from the applicant, but he was voicing from the folks that hired him that there would be some openness to doing different things, just not the approach that came in with this application.
Thank you, Jeff. Andrew, did you have anything you want to add on this topic?
Thanks.
You're okay. So I do appreciate where folks have sort of come on this, on the Attorney Herbst and his representation of his clients. The other things that only thing I would add, he did sort of, as part of his submissions into the record, offer that sort of planning document from the state's housing office that sort of talked about that other process that is all communities, including ours, are going to be undertaking, which is not a substitute for this by any stretch. There's an application in front of us that we have to act on. But to me, I took away from that there's, some elements of really addressing housing diversity, housing needs that were highlighted there in really those attachments to Herbst's presentation or his submissions that are valuable for us to consider within the record that we're considering. The other thing is that he did repeat a number of times that on behalf of his clients that Woodbridge needs to do something. So that was part of the message that I took home. Yes, not exactly what these applicants have put forward, but there again seemed to be a sentiment of willingness, at least on behalf of his clients, for some change would move us in the direction towards more diversity in housing and housing opportunities. So those are the two takeaways I took from those presentations, that this is a statewide problem, that there are, that our state agencies are developing sort of guidance and sort of trying to help towns address this, things that we can look to for guidance, and that there was a sense that we needed to do something, though not, they were obviously did not like what was put forward by the applicant. I have to go back to my list. And it's probably a good segue and I think Attorney Dubuque could probably explain this more eloquently than I can. Herbst was representing a subset of the public that, because they were an organized sort of group, we had them make sort of presentations. They weren't interveners or, in the proceeding, but because they had that sort of organization and we wanted to be open and sort of inviting folks. That's why they were a group of the public represented by a particular person and their consultants. But they're still in that larger public. So let's go to the public sort of comments and submissions, which I will start just briefly here, thanking again the number of people from the public who took the time, who joined us on all of our 3-4 hour meetings that sometimes had to wait quite a bit while we were all talking or the lawyers were talking, whoever was talking, before they got to put forward their 3 minutes of oral argument or oral testimony into the record, and huge numbers of letters. It was really impressive to me, the amount of folks who were engaged on this topic. And I know, and I'm guessing beyond that, the amount that were actually even testifying, there are plenty of people watching it on our videos and the public access TV station. So a huge thank you for that level of engagement, which I think was definitely impressive. So with that, thank you. I now open it up to the rest of the commission members for their reaction to the array of public comments we received.
Well, I also was impressed with the degree of contribution to the issue by the public, some of which became repetitive after a while, much of which was eloquently put forth and helpful.
Thank you, Andrew. Other commission members' reactions to the public comments, both the written and the live testimony.
I would second your comments, Mr. Chairman, about the patience of folks waiting to, participate in a public hearing, and I would also second and agree with Attorney Skolnick's comments that much of the comments were heartfelt and meaningful, and but there were a slice that were repetitive, and I think there were also a slice that were based echoing some fear and some ignorance of history that I think while we can't we don't really have to do much outside research. I think the application lays a lot of it out, like as Jeff said and Mr. Kennedy said, Commissioner Kennedy said in a fairly damning way, but there's a lot of history there, and history makes people uncomfortable. Politics makes people uncomfortable, and change makes people uncomfortable. And we definitely heard that in the comments that we heard from people. I do think it's regrettable that there was an entity that took it upon themselves to sow fear in our community. And I said this before, sending out a flyer to everybody's mailbox and misrepresenting and kind of just, presenting things in a way that isn't reflective of the whole picture. I think that does a lot to scare people, because people don't have the time to do their research and their investigate and understand. Obviously, this was extremely complex, understanding the possible outcomes here and what could happen with a change like this. I think we've all taken it very seriously, but somebody who's just a member of the public can't necessarily be expected to do that, which is why we took on, as individuals, this very weighty responsibility to be a part of this process. So, yeah, that's all I have.
Thank you, Yoni. Jeff or Paul, your thoughts on the public comments?
Look, I'll echo what other commission members have said. I mean, I appreciate people taking the time to write in letters and also to call in. I've read everybody's letters. You've listened to the remarks. I'm a little frustrated over process. I think it would be interesting to have further discussion with some of the people that have called in, that some of whom I would agree with and some I wouldn't. But in the context of a town like Woodbridge, we often work out things in public and in dialogue and so forth. So I feel a little bit disappointed that I couldn't talk to some of the people that called in and get more of their thoughts. But we did have a significant response. I think that's very helpful. And in the letters, people have clearly articulated their viewpoints.
Thank you, Jeff. Paul, your thoughts?
Yeah, so, I mean, there's nothing earth-shattering that hasn't already been said, but it goes without saying that I think it's certainly a testament to our town that people showed up. It doesn't matter what side of the issue, in my view, the public came. It's that they came out with comments. And that's what you want during a process. You want the public to come out so people can hear what they have to say. We can all take their opinions, whether one by one or, for the most part, people chose a side, and there's nothing wrong with that. I agree with, I think Yoni said it earlier. It really bothers me. I won't speak for anybody else. It really bothers me when people spread fear without fact. It's much easier to do today with social media than it ever was before. That really, whether I agree with their opinion as a base case, is irrelevant. But it bothers me when people spread facts, but they can't use their own facts. That disappointed me. And also disappointed me when people try to engage in ex parte comments that after certainly knowing it. Disappoints me. But I love that the vast majority of the people, and I love when the younger people came out. Again, it doesn't matter what their view is, the fact that the younger people were so passionate, felt so much passion about the issue. I think that's great. I bet 95% of the comments were constructive and heartfelt and and genuine. I still don't understand process-wise, because I'm still getting educated as to why people who don't live in town can come public comment. Not that they don't have a right to free speech, but it's really not relevant. Why would someone want to come to our town to speak when they don't live here? But that's certainly the prerogative. I don't understand why that's permissible. And then finally, there's always, the few bad apples from my days at Center School learning about bad apples. I'm always bothered by the hypocrisy of people trying to lecture on issues when they behave oppositely on their own. I mean, so there's always those negative or those hypocritical comments that stick with you when the vast majority of our residents were really great and part of the process. So I will continue to thank them and reiterate that what they may not know is that this is the first time that this commission has been able to speak to each other publicly, ask questions, offer comments. We didn't have an O.J. Simpson style legal team with us, and I think our lawyer did a yeoman's job helping us. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart, Marianne. We didn't come with reams of data and people don't know that we don't have separate meetings. So when we come and we sit and listen, and then this is our opportunity, it's not like we met at someone's office and deliberate. It's not how it works. This is our opportunity. So the folks should know that. But overall, I'm proud and impressed by our by overall people that made comments.
So thank you all, and thank you to our attorney who has been supporting us through this process, who is one person. I think I would, so I already thanked the public, and I appreciate everyone's thanks as well that you've shared and the engagement. In the substance of what our public, particularly the ones that were engaged, they were wrestling with the topic in many ways like we are. Many of them, at least to my reading, had an interest, which I think we're seeing potentially emerge here, in doing something, in figuring out that we can improve where we currently are in terms of housing diversity and our housing opportunities. And so that was a theme that now some took offense at, well, why are they telling us? Why can't we do it ourselves? Why can there be other processes? And one on that, to me, is obviously the public's right to sort of talk about those elements of it. But to me, what I take away from the public's comments is what all of you did, is that they were very engaged, and they were, for the vast majority, and they were very thoughtful, and they did see this, quite a few of the members of the public, as an opportunity to make a step forward on these issues, which I took away from quite a few of the public comments. And some of them had that sort of twist of, yeah, I'm not sure I like the way it was presented, but the issue is still important, and I want to see something done about it. Those are the comments that I gravitated towards. Other reactions or thoughts on public comment that we've received? Because there's quite a lot. I don't see any other folks on the public comment. Do we want to dive into some of the letters we received from the various sort of agencies, the South Central Regional Council of Governments, the Water Authority? Who has thoughts or reactions to those documents or letters? So I'm not hearing any. So I'll offer some. I think it was sort of interesting at a number of levels. So we have what I think one of the big things that we were discussing through the applicants' through the planning folks and through these submissions is some of the challenges of development in public water supply areas and different approaches to sort of think about the environmental impacts of development. And thinking in those regards about, what our soils can manage, what are the water supply areas, what is sort of best practices in ensuring that you're not contributing to pollution that might cause impacts to public water supplies, particularly in a town like ours where quite a few folks rely on well water, and we're also a town that quite a few areas have sort of septic systems that are also sometimes need to be designed in ways to avoid impacts to water quality. But there's this sort of another sort of element that came out, which I'm still, trying to wrestle with in my head, is this notion of things that happen on an individual property versus thinking about multiple properties and the cumulative effects of development in water supply areas. So I did appreciate having those various reports, and we may need to go into them into detail as we're sort of looking at different options in different part of town, but recognizing that there are potentially some concerns in development that could impact water supply and the cumulative effects of development things that may be allowed on one property and the next property and the next property that can add up to impacts across the watershed. So those are some of the things that are, to me, sort of areas to pay pretty close attention to as we're thinking about changes, if any, to the density of housing in different parts of our community. Other thoughts or reactions to the reports and those reports?
Some things that I thought about that weren't completely focused on this application, but I mean, I call myself a 55-year Woodbridge resident, which is a little bit of an exaggeration, but I noticed that over the years, what was once okay, traffic wise, parking wise, development wise, over the years has changed as the environment's changed. So when we talk about water tables, I just from memory of living here, I have recalled people talking about how water was years past and how it's changed, how the wells have gotten more challenging, and that may not be because of development, or it may, who knows, but certainly it could be just because of how the environment's changed. So I left reading some of those documents with more questions than comments and answers. Like I want to be thoughtful enough to consider other people down the road regarding especially water tables. I mean, that seems to be a common concern in town, and I think it's been that way for decades. Forgetting about that, whether it's this applicant, but just with development in general, is that we keep taxing the aquifers and what have you, and we don't know what the consequences will be, 5, 10, 20 years hence.
Thank you, Paul. Other thoughts, reactions to the agency type submissions?
I did have I was left with some. I mean, the thing that you just articulated, Paul, has been probably the primary concern that I've carried in the back of my mind throughout all of this is, what is the effect going to be just if the application was approved as is, and there is a potential for development in the way that has been suggested by the Orchard Road application. And if that application comes about by other, on other properties throughout Woodbridge, and what is going to be the effect? And I heard the applicants sort of allude to it, and there was some sort of discussion around the edges of that question. One of the takeaways that I get from the materials that were provided by the state agencies is that each application is reviewed individually. So if the Two Orchard Road, if the regulations are changed wholesale across all zones, and then the Two Orchard Road application gets submitted, it'll be viewed in light of what's around that Two Orchard Road property. And then potentially down the line, somebody who's at my next door neighbor or your next door neighbor or whatever, does something somewhat similar, that also gets reviewed by the Department of Public Health and the Regional Water Authority before it could pass through and get approval from, the zoning enforcement officer or our commission. And it will necessarily mean that there will be, it will be different depending on what the future looks like, right? Depending on how much market there really is for this sort of thing. And because, I think it's interesting because Rob's probably the closest that we have to an expert on anything approaching this. And I think he would say that he's not, but, it's a complex subject. And we heard the engineers and the consultants going back and forth about it. It's a complex subject, how water gets dispersed and how it gets used and drawn up and how dense a property should be. So I guess my comment really would be about the materials and the reports that we got from the state agencies was that they were illustrative, but I think I expressed this in a previous hearing. I certainly wouldn't have minded to hear directly and be able to ask directly of somebody from either DPH or the Regional Water Authority or both about the issue. But, we have what we have. So
I think the applicant's approach that they were looking for is sort of to have zoning step out of the way of development and to allow more development, but then to rely on state agencies to regulate things like water or sewer or other things. I think, and you might have been getting in that a little bit, but I think they were looking for local zoning to step out of the way. And again, as time would go or go on, DEP or other agencies, health departments and stuff would sort of step in as a regulatory type mechanism to adapt change over time. But they wanted zoning to be set aside. I see it a little bit differently. I think that zoning should maybe work alongside agencies to coordinate development or so forth, and they should maybe be more in lockstep with each other.
But can I just respond? So Jeff, I was thinking about that too, and I think isn't part of the problem then that every town then has to hire? I don't actually know Chris's credentials. She's our zoning enforcement officer, preceded by Terry. May rest in peace. And the two of them together, before he passed, had a wealth of knowledge, and she's presenting a wealth of knowledge and information. And as the zoning enforcement officer, it's her obligation and responsibility to be familiar with the code, the local code. But I think it almost then suggests if you play that out, it's sort of suggesting that person be the gatekeeper in a way to work with the state. And I think the takeaway that I got from the application and from the many hearings that we had was that if a developer comes along and says, I've bought Two Orchard Road, here's the application I'd like, here's what I'd like it to look like, here are the plans that I'm submitting, then, you know, someone like Christine's job is supposed to be, do you meet all of our local regulations? But then there are a whole nother set of regulations and laws and reviews that it goes through, such that, yeah, she does have to stand out of the way because it's not her area of expertise. And they can come in and say, hey, no offense, but that's not your area of expertise. We've done a study and we've determined that you can't build that here, or you can only build it here if. And that kind of thing routinely happens in development, right? But because I'm not a developer, I'm not an expert on that. So, you know, I see it as, I see the goal as trying to harmonize regulations across towns rather than having 159, or what do we have in this state, different fiefdoms where I have to go to each one and say, well, I think yours is a little like Woodbridge. And I have some experience with that. So I'd like to submit an application. Oh, no, actually, no, I need to go home and become an expert on your local regulations there, you know, and what's allowed there, right? And I think the idea is that it shouldn't be like that. You know, I'm not a libertarian. I'm the opposite of a libertarian, but I think that I see eye to eye with libertarians on that. That if somebody meets a set of open and obvious and well thought out regulations, they should be able to come and submit an application.
That's what they're looking for.
Subjected to,
yes,
right, and they shouldn't be subjected to
over the counter
decision that you know. Right. I mean, and if they've made a compelling case, and I'm not saying I'm 100% convinced that they have or not, because I'm not an expert on water, but I did not hear any state-supported or consultant-supported information presented to me that said, if you do this way, it's going to be a disaster. I heard from, there were insinuations that it could potentially be a disaster, but nobody convinced me that there's a disaster waiting to happen, But going back to what Paul just said, or earlier said, right? I don't want to be the one that said, yes, go ahead, and then disaster came about because of a decision I made. On the other hand, I mean, that kind of thing happens all the time. That's what government's about. I mean, you participate in government and you take the chance that the decision that you make based on the best information that you have is going to be the right one. And then you hope that the people who are the professionals do their jobs correctly, and so that somebody's well doesn't get ruined or somebody's water supply doesn't get, I don't think that should all be on us, Yeah.
So, Yoni and Jeff, if you don't mind, I'll sort of hop in here because I think this is an interesting element for us to continue to talk about and wrestle with a bit. This, particularly on this question of, in essence, letting, which in this case I think is the public health agency, be the arbiter of how large a development, how many units, through their regulation of the septic systems necessary to serve X numbers of bathrooms and the like. And that's sort of this, so there's that debate. Do we basically stay hands off and allow that to just be purely a question for public health to determine you have this many bathrooms and this type of soil and this type of flow? It means that you're capped at this size versus is there value, and I'll review this, but I think there is, in having the Planning and Zoning Commission be more in the mode of planning for that development and not having, and sort of looking at that entirety of a zone, particularly in our zones that are watershed areas, that takes into account, wait a minute, maybe we don't want to leave it all up to an outside entity's determination. We want to be involved. That's one element. There's another element which you also brought up of once, this question of do you need to have special exceptions and special reviews, other sorts of things, versus you set the rule, we set all the rules, make them crystal clear, and there's basically one form of, if you want to do development in this zone, it has to meet all these specific parameters. If you meet all of them, you get it, and if you don't, you need a variance, or so don't go to us, you go somewhere else. That is a related but slightly different question of are these types of developments available over the counter as of right, where you would basically make your zoning regulations have all the boxes they have to check, and if they check all those, we've now determined as a group once that anything that checks all the boxes is okay. So those are two, to me, slightly different but related sort of questions. Are the public health one, to me, going back to the Regional Water Authority's letter, which I think it's their March 1st, 2021 letter from Ronald Walters, it's worth a read, raises kind of this sort of question, which I think also came up in our discussions as we heard from the applicants and elsewhere, that there was a generally accepted sort of, and I'm reading, it is generally accepted that a maximum density of one dwelling per 2 acres will provide adequate protection of water quality if appropriate pollution control measures are utilized. So there's that sort of recognition that that's kind of the way that, the system has been created. It's echoed in some of the documents from the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, which go back to the 90s and earlier. But there's that's sort of a generally accepted principle. There's also, though, relatedly, impervious cover. So the amount of a property that's covered with parking areas, roof, buildings, etc., is also a challenge for water quality because of runoff and the inability to basically let the soil do its natural processes and sort of help clean and cleanse water as it heads into our aquifers. So they had recommendations on impervious cover, which we don't. And Chris, I will ask you for confirmation. We have some sort of rules about impervious, or the percentage of land that can be covered in the different zones, but we don't have anything specific on impervious cover.
I'm checking your regs. So keep going, and I'll answer your question.
But so, to me, those are sort of interesting elements of that Regional Water Authority proposal. That in the past, that sort of zoning in watershed areas is protective, but another key consideration is thinking about just how much pavement, tennis courts, broadly, how much we're covering of our land area, which can also be important. The other thing to keep in mind, if we are going into this area, you want to be consistent in how you're treating your any sort of development in a watershed zone. That would be another thing to keep in mind, obviously.
So in section 4, which is your table 4.1, table of general bulk regulations, the headings that you have in there are building massing, setbacks for principal buildings, setbacks for accessory buildings, building height, and residential density. So that's what your bulk regulations address.
Thank you, Chris. So other reactions to the agency reports or?
Rob, I had a couple questions to ask you. So one, during the hearing, at one point, prodding, or you're involved in a discussion regarding the impervious coverage, and it was, I want to say from memory, it was long and horizontal versus square, and it's a topic I didn't understand where you were going or what was the concern. That's question one for you. And two, when you brought up the impervious coverage, maybe it's a question for Marianne or Chris, but is that something we should have in our regs overall?
So let's start with the first one, because I think you're referring to, I was venturing into a discussion with the engineers about the design of the septic sort of system. And they offered sort of a schematic in one of the applicant's presentations, trying to sort of demonstrate how, don't worry, your typical lot here will typically have a wetland that'll take certain parts out of the lot. It'll typically put a house here, and it needs to have a well that has a circle around it that tells you how far away it is, that you can't have your well too close to your septic. And all those things combined means that you really wouldn't get many developments that are that large. They think that schematic representation of the 2 Orchard Road development with its number of units and its number of bedrooms was basically constrained by the septic system size and the need for keeping septic away from your well and making sure your septic and well are not too close to your neighbor's septic and well and all those things and whatever wetlands on your property. And the only sort of reason I was sort of diving in is they were offering obviously they're advocates and they're an applicant for a particular thing. They didn't want us to worry about, their rule, which could, as written, allow for much more units and much more development. They were saying, no, it would never be 12 units or 16 units or whatnot. It would only really be this large. Here's our typical look. And my prodding was, well, does that, I was trying to get at, well, they chose one orientation that the septic lines were going horizontal, if they did them vertical, if they moved. The only reason for that back and forth was to say, yeah, you picked a schematic that is favorable to you. I could probably draw a schematic that squeezes in at least a couple more bedrooms or, theoretically. And so to me, that gets at that question of, do we want public health and the septic engineering calculations to be the limiting factor, or do we want to actually have our own sort of limits, irrespective of, what the septic would allow you or not allow you to do? And I lean towards the latter, not leaving it up to septic, because just as they put up forward a hypothetical that was favorable to them, I could probably find a property where you could squeeze a lot more density and have enough room for septic that doesn't have a wetland in its way. Does that help, Paul?
Yeah, it makes perfect. It makes perfect sense.
And that's, some of the engineers sort of back and forth, which does get bogged down in their sort of calculation of bedrooms to septic field length and slopes and whatnot, which and Paul, as to the second, that was a question of whether we should have impervious cover regulations. And I'll rephrase that slightly as, because it was raised and presented by the Regional Water Authority and it was discussed in this record, if we hypothetically are in the world where we're talking about reasonable adjustments in light of what was submitted to us, is that the type of thing that we could consider? Or is that starting to edge towards something that wasn't squarely put in front of us, impervious cover? Though, because the applicants did talk, they presented us a whole series of pictures of houses with big driveways and tennis courts and whatnot, saying, hey, look what you already have in terms of impervious cover in your town.
Chairman Klee, the topic of impervious coverage is in the record during public hearing, so it is an issue that you could consider.
Great. Thank you.
And if we were hypothetically to propose amendments to the pending application that made substantive changes, would that require a new set of public hearing with respect to those that substitute proposal?
I was wondering that myself.
Chairman Klee, if I may,
Please.
that depends. So the whole purpose of the public hearing process and the original notices of the public hearing are to give the public, the applicants, anyone who's interested, a fair opportunity to understand what is being discussed, what is being considered. So you have to, let's say, stay within your lane a little bit in terms of, you can't come up with something totally new, some totally new concept that no one has raised and decide that you should put it in this amendment. Let's talk about the zoning regulation amendment because you think it's a good idea now. It has to be, again, an issue that was raised during the public hearing process, and now in terms of your evaluation, you can decide how you would want to approach it. So you're not giving carte blanche with this amendment. There's a framework of this amendment. There are topics that are included in the amendment. There are topics that were included during the public hearing process. So that's also why I'm here to kind of monitor. And if you start to go a little too far afield, then I will respectfully ask to speak on the subject as to whether that's really something that, the public and the applicants were fairly apprised of during the public hearing process.
So,
but it is clear from the statute, again, that you are allowed to act on the application. You are allowed to consider reasonable changes, and so that's important to keep in mind too. It's not a yay or a nay in their entirety, as Chairman Clay previously explained.
Yoni, you may have had a follow-up.
I don't want to interrupt if Andrew had something. He was going to follow up. I didn't want to. Might have had a train of thought.
I think my question was answered. So, in other words, we have neither the authority nor the charge to, on one hand, recognize a problem, and on the other hand, propose a solution to that problem different substantially from what the application has requested.
I don't think that's the complete correct characterization, because again, there were issues that were raised during the public hearing. There's documents in the record that talk about certain topics. There's the letters from the agencies, the letters from the PowerPoint presentations, the reports. There's a broad range of relevant possibilities, options, and you can consider those things that were already raised. What I'm suggesting here is that you can't come up with a totally new concept and say, oh, I now, or we as a collective body, because that's what you're acting as, now have realized that we can solve the whole process of the whole issue of housing diversity, housing opportunity by doing something totally different. The reason you're allowed to act on the application and not to merely accept it or deny it is to give you an opportunity to work within the concepts so that you don't have to start the whole public hearing process all over again.
Okay.
Yeah, did you want to?
I think it's troubling that we find ourselves, and I have to say that we find ourselves in the position of having to essentially fix a problem. Maybe I'm just complaining here, but that we have to fix a problem that should have been fixed already. And as I suggested in the various hearings we had on this application, there were proposals to try and allow for some development of affordable housing in different zones in this town, and those got taken out. Those got removed in response to a loud chorus of people who said, "Don't you dare." And so it was interesting to me to hear and see some of the presentation in which some of those very proposals were sort of resurrected in a way. I agree with you, Rob, that there should be some local control. I'm not suggesting that that there's some analogy like you take the driver's test in Hamden or you take the driver's test in Milford or West Haven, and it doesn't matter as long as you meet the requirements, you get the driver's license. That if you walk into Woodbridge and you've checked all the boxes, you get to do the development that you want, no questions asked. There should be some measure of local control and recognition of the unique characteristics of the watershed, which is the most one of the most critical things. I think it's irresponsible, and I want to say it publicly. And this is not a criticism of you, Mr. Former Commissioner of DEEP, but I think it's horribly sad and irresponsible that the Department of Environmental Protection is still relying on a report for the Blue Ribbon Commission on housing the land acquired to support residential development in Connecticut, that exhibit from May 1989. The fact that they have not taken the time to do a new report in that regard, I think is really a testament to the failure of our of DEEP. Not necessarily to you. I think the issue was far more complex than whether or not the commissioner wanted it. So, but I do want to say that publicly because I think it undermines the position that there have been advancements in water treatment technology since May 1989, and presumably that report was based on data from, even earlier than that. There have been some pretty tremendous advances in water treatment for individual homes and buildings that I think are not reflected in the materials that the state has available, and I think that's a failure. I think that's a failure. I think it's a sign that something needs to be done to improve that, because we as individual towns and individual zoning commissions are looking to the state. You mentioned that Attorney Herbst had brought into the record that I think it was a Department of Housing report, set of recommendations of how to go forward with meeting the requirements under the law. Well, the other agencies need to be doing something like that as well, and I think DEEP ought to have done more by now than something from 1989. So
Yoni,
that's where.
Yeah. So Yoni, I would respond that I think that report and the function of that agency is not about technology on water treatment at the side of your house, which is also not really part of what we're talking about here in this proceeding. The agency's focus is on the entire watershed and watershed quality, and just the recognition, which I think still, and I believe the agency responded in our record, that those same basic understandings of how the watersheds work, particularly public water supply watersheds, is that they don't, development in watersheds can cause risk to that communal water supply, not talking about an individual water supply. So that is still a basic sort of tenet, that you build more in watershed areas, now, whether their version of it is the one house for 2 acres, the sort of evolving view is about impervious surface, not just the house, it's actually all the things that are there. Those are things that have been evolving over time, but the basic is still the same, that you are building in a watershed, you are putting that aquifer, the broader water body, at risk, irrespective of whether you would treat the water at your home and how you would do that. Though, frankly, part of the reason we have good drinking water in Connecticut, we don't actually end up having challenges like you see in many other communities, is that we really try to keep those water supplies very well protected and very well segregated from development, whether housing or industrial or other sorts of things. I'll stop with on that tangent, other than to say, I think the still basics are there, that development in a watershed can cause problems for that aquifer, and you need to think about that.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with that principle, that it's been stated time and since since we came to understand water and how watersheds work. So couldn't you play out that? Though I have yet to hear in anything you said, Rob. If you play out the parade of horribles, or just play out the possibility that Woodbridge has changed its regulations to allow for this kind of development across all zones, and then a developer, if you find one, comes along and puts together a proposal, and they submit the proposal, and it goes to the RWA, and it goes to the DOH, Department of Health, and both of them say, no way, you can't do it. Not the way you've laid it out. Go back to the drawing board. And I mean, help me understand why A, there's something wrong with that, and then B, then if there is something wrong with that, and we're not comfortable with that, and I'm not, I'm open. Then how do we craft a set of zoning regulations, or amend this proposal in such a way so as to build in a safeguard that says, yes, while in theory you could build it across all of our zones, you can only do so, and you'll only be able to do so if the following occurs. That seems to me like a tremendous project to undertake, to amend what they're proposing into something that could potentially be workable and also safeguards the watershed. How do we even do that? I mean, that's going to be a bunch more hearings.
Yeah, Oh, Jeff, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, a little bit on that point. And we're inside of an application, so this application is right in front of us. But the issues that are presented in the application exist before and after this application. It could be changed by the application, whether we do on it or not. But to your point, towns are supposed to do that through their plan of conservation and development, and ongoing process of working with a town planner, because it is very hard, And so if you wanted to add affordable housing, or you wanted to have, some middle housing, if you would, or, any change like that, I think what you would do is you have to go through this, the process of the plan of conservation and development. And that process is what can line up zoning with state agency rules and procedures, and you get them in sync. And then you get them in sync with what you want your town to look like over a period of time. Now, what the applicant would say is Woodbridge hasn't ever made any of these moves to do that. Like, Woodbridge has never tried to have more affordable housing or different types of housing. So that's, I think, some of their reason or justification for hurry up and get this done, just as it is in front of us now. But what you're saying, Yoni, there are mechanisms to fix the very good points you're bringing up, and it's through the process of the POCD and involving an economic development council, and involving the leadership of a town, and involving other folks within the town over a political process to do these revisions and to make them. But the applicant's point, and that they've made, is that we've never done anything like that as a town, and there's been no movement, so therefore we have to do what they're saying. But to solve your problem, yeah, it's solvable, and it is so complicated to solve these. It's very complicated to bring all of these things in, but it can happen if people are dedicated to it and work on it over a period of time. But hence, we're now in an application where that we can't really do that. We have some constraints. Anyway, that's just a view.
Yeah, Jeff, appreciate the view. I would only add, though, that we do have in front of us a request to change our zoning regulations and change our plan of conservation and development.
We do.
So we have some of those elements in front of us right now. To Yoni's sort of question, that part of where what I struggle with in having other entities sort of making the decisions, or being the one that seems to take away the sort of basic function of our planning and zoning commission, which is to receive applications and act on them. Now, acting on them can again be based on hearings and special exceptions and et cetera. It can be the sort of block that if you hit all these things that we've written into our rules, you're fine. But I still think that is an important role for our commission, and particularly acting on things in front of us, like the thing that is currently in front of us. I think that from what we have in our record and the things that are in front of us, we can come up with a reasonable approach, which I think, and it's on my list of the sort of Chalder sort of framework of sort of options, where we can be systematic going through our zones, recognizing that there are differences amongst our zones in even within things that are currently a big sort of residential zone has watershed and non-watershed. And we can think about systematically how to approach each one of those through, I think, reasonable modifications to what has been submitted to us. I don't know if that's I think that's enough. Any other reactions, Paul or Andrew? So I want to make sure we keep moving to, we have I'll kind of group these, the planners reports and the engineers reports. And Paul, we already talked a bit about the engineers reports on, septic systems and how they're designed and whatnot. But any other reactions to the Poland, Miller, or Chalder sort of planners reports? So I'm hearing none. I will note that they're worth kind of going through, and we do have Mr. Chalder as our sort of on board person. That the sort of different sort of approaches to the changes in zoning in particular, and what the sort of details mean in the applicant's proposal versus understanding. We spent a lot of time talking, I think, about how you develop the affordability plan and who is monitoring the affordable units and the sort of timing and how many of the units should be affordable, those sorts of things. There's a lot of sort of detailed back and forth there between the different sort of planning experts on the sort of approaches to this text amendment of opportunity housing. We talked about the time for which it has to be affordable. We talked about the one unit, the percentages, how to calculate how much isn't affordable. So there's a lot of detail there in the mechanics of the text amendment as proposed. Anyone have any specific reactions to that? Sure, go ahead, Paul.
Rob, or maybe it's a question for Mary Ann. So Glenn Chalder is our consultant. What are the parameters of what he is allowed to do during our deliberations?
Attorney Dubuque, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So he's allowed to provide technical assistance to the commission on issues that were raised during the public hearing. So if there's a point that is unclear in your mind, you can ask a question and he can answer it based on what has already been discussed in the record, whether it's in his report or in one of the other consultants' reports or presentations, testimony, and the like. You can ask for him to render technical assistance to you. He won't be volunteering any information. He will only be responsive as long as it was an issue that's already been raised.
And then what about regarding alternatives to the applicant's proposal? As I recall, and I've got reams of notes next to me, he put forth some of his own thoughts. So is he permitted to regurgitate some of his own thoughts that have already been mentioned in the record?
Yes, so he provided a framework. If you decide to use that framework as a tool in your deliberations, you can go over it and ask for clarification. He's not going to volunteer any opinions on what you should do. It was just intended to provide a guidance document. So you can ask him questions with respect to what this means. And because he did already explain it, he's just going to go over what he already explained, because, as you said, there's been reams of information, and I'm sure you don't have command of every single detail, but he knows he's a veteran of these types of proceedings. He knows what he's testified about. He knows what's in his framework, and to the extent you have any questions or you decide to use it, and I want to be very clear about that, that is entirely your decision. It was properly put in the record, but it's entirely your decision if you'd like to use that framework to help assist you in your determination.
So at the risk of causing our tech to, can I share that framework so we're all clear on what we're all talking about? Right. Chris, am I able to share my screen?
Or you could also point us to it on the document. I'm on the TPC website, and I was actually not sure if I'm looking at the right one.
I just shared
what's the title of the
screen with Rob.
Yeah, it's called a Conceptual Framework 03-31-21, and I'm going to share my screen so so everyone who's watching can also be on the same page, because I think I can share my screen. I've never actually done this one. Oh, here it is.
All I know is how to give you the ball. There you go.
Okay, now I'm interested in what I'm... So I can't see all of you as well. Oh, there you come. All right, so this was, just so we're all on the same page, a framework that our consultant created that helps sort of walk through each of our zones that are currently in our zoning regulations and sort of map out what is allowed, which I believe is in green, the things that are requested by the applicants to be allowed by zoning permit zoning permit only. And I believe the gray circle is an option, things that could be allowed if we were interested. And I'm on page 1 of the document. I will move to page 2. Hopefully that's scrolling around. So the other, just to help orient ourselves, it starts, the columns are each of our different zones, and the additional sort of data here is the sort of watershed components of the A1 and A2 zones. Then each of the rows, or sort of blocks of rows, look at as a single unit where that's allowed, whether 2 units are allowed. And on the second page is 3 units or 4 units and up. So this is, again, a way for us, if we were thinking of going zone by zone, to look and see where we might be interested in adjusting making reasonable adjustments to the applicant's proposal. And I believe the last page was providing some just examples of things that are in each of the different zones. Mr. Schaller, is that a fair sort of overview of your conceptual framework?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman.
So this is something that we can use to help, sort of guide us as we, maybe, and this will be something that we'll talk about before we close today, if we are interested in going down the road of exploring alternatives to what's been proposed. This is a way to help sort of guide the evaluation of alternatives. We pause there, Paul. I believe that was your question that started us here, but and Yoni, I think you're unmuted as you're reading.
I'm yeah.
So should I keep sharing the screen or should I move off of it?
Can you leave it up for a little while longer?
Sure. As we're leaving it up, I know we had a couple of other, we had all the sort of discussions and debates during our public hearings, and I'll put that one aside for a moment. But then in addition to this conceptual framework, we also had our utilities map that, that the town created to sort of highlight where there was public water supply areas, where there was public water service, where there was sewer service, and how that intersected with our various zones. And again, that is also available. I don't think I can share two things at once, though, Paul, so I'll leave that off. There are also in our record the baseline sort of water quality classification maps, the soil suitability maps as well. Any additional thoughts or reactions? Those reference materials. Okay. Do you want me to move to the other page of this document? Yes. So again, this helps us sort of visualize what these different developments at the single family, 2 units, 3 units, and 4 units above would kind of look like in each of the zones. And you'll notice on the second page that there are no green squares. So we currently don't allow these types of 3 unit or 4 unit developments in any of these zones, which is part of, frankly, the reason why the applicants brought their application here. It's partly because of this. And I guess the questions for us are there ways to address these different types of housing and I guess I'll ask Mr. Chalder if you can explain a bit more what the gray circles represent on this diagram.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. I think the gray circles are options that the commission may want to discuss or consider. For example, line, we're looking here at the second page of the handout. In 3 units per parcel, there are 3 lines of circles. The first one, the applicant has requested, is a 3-family building with at least 1 unit at 60% of area median income. That's why it's the orange circle. And they've again requested that across all the zoning districts. And then line K, just below that, is a 3-family building with one unit at 60% of AMI and a second unit at 80% of AMI. And then the third option, line L, could be a 3-family building using a multifamily regulation of some type and specific standards. So the applicant requested the first line, line J, and other options for the commission. Again, these are to kind of promote discussion among the commission members, are some of these other lines.
And Mr. Chalder, those other, so in sticking with this example of the 3 units per parcel, K and L are things for discussion. Were they part of your other presentations and recommendations as well? Or would we find more depth to them if we went into the PowerPoints? Or
I think I've touched on some of these elements, Mr. Chairman, and part of the other presentation. Part of the issue, for example, in line K, was whether or not the 10% of the units being affordable was the right percentage, and whether, in fact, if the commission was going to act in a more affirmative action, increase the percentage. Now, certainly at a lower number of units, like 3 units per parcel, one affordable unit in a 3-unit development is 33%. So 2 units would be 67%. So that's a pretty dramatic increase. Again, these are to promote discussion and get the commission thinking of alternative ideas.
thank you, Mr. Chalder. So I think I want to do a time check and note that we've been at this a little over 2 hours, which I want to be respectful of folks' times. But from a process and procedure sort of standpoint, I'm curious. We've sort of walked through the record that's before us, and to the extent I can make a sort of general characterization of the record is that it's quite large, it's quite extensive, so quite a lot of material in there. And to some of the sort of questions about our, I do believe that I'll sort of leave it at that. But there's plenty of topics about how to increase the diversity and availability of different housing and more dense housing in all the zones. It's kind of all in the record there. And the other sort of complicating part of that is that there's a whole lot of ways to do that. And that's why I believe the framework that Mr. Chalder sort of created offers here's what the applicants specifically proposed. Here are, in each case, 2 or so other options that might be worth considering. For us, we only start doing that consideration of these other options if we're heading down the roads of, yeah, we want to look at the alternatives. So I don't know if we should take a temperature of our group at this point to say, is this the road we should be heading down? Should we be exploring, yes, the applicants have put something before us. We're not going to approve it wholly. We're not going to reject it wholly. We want to be in that third category of finding reasonable alternatives, if we can, to what they proposed. So I want to get a sense from the commission members, should we head down this road? And I'll start. I, for one, would like to head down this road and start exploring options.
I have absolutely no problem concurring and exploring options as well, Rob.
Thank you, Paul. Yoni or Jeff?
So I don't mind exploring options.
I'll listen to what you have to say.
And Andrew? Andrew may get back to us. Okay. So if we're going to go down this road, we should figure out the right sort of way to approach it and to sort of talk about these different options and see people's appetite for sort of reasonable adjustments to the proposal. So maybe we'll start on this first page. And I also want to recognize that we're going to get close to 9 o'clock soon, and I don't want to. We're in essence going to go into some of the more nitty-gritty details here of what might be possible. So if we start doing this, maybe we should just start with the 2 units per parcel category on this first page and see what it would look like to sort of walk through those different options. So the applicant's yellow proposal is line I, and they, based on their proposed changes to our zoning regulations, would allow 2-family buildings with at least 1 unit at 60% area median income in every one of our zones. We have, so if not that, one of the options presented is to allow 2-family buildings without a requirement that 1 unit be 60% AMI. We currently allow that in the T3D zone and the T3C zone. If you look at the gray circles, that could be allowed across the board in all of our zones with a sort of question mark for the watershed areas. So there's one option. And a second option to not allow for 2-family buildings, but instead allow for what are called accessory dwelling units, which we do currently allow in most of our zones except for T3D and T3BB. So I guess the question to the commission is, do we have interest in allowing more availability of 2 units per parcel developments in more of our zones?
One question I had was whether or not T3C and T3D, where they're currently allowed 2-family buildings, are those in watershed areas? Are T3 and T3C and T3D not in watershed areas, or is it because they're in they're served by water and sewer that it doesn't matter almost? Is that am I understanding that correctly, Mr. Chalner?
And if I may, Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
I think from the utilities map, Yanni, you could see that the T3C and the T3D areas are in the southeast corner, and
Right.
the public water supply areas are sort of diagonal from northeast to southwest. So those 2 zones are not in a public water supply watershed area. They are served by public water and public sewer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Other question I had was what does that mean across H? Line H, where you've got what does it say? get my own here. Potential conflict with CGS 8-3I for a suggestion of having it, allowing it possible option. What does that mean to be potential conflict? Could you just walk me through that a little?
Yeah, I think, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I think this is in the record. The issue is Connecticut General Statute 8-3I provides for notification to the water company and the Connecticut Department of Public Health when a development is proposed in a public water supply watershed area. And there are two parts to that, one of which is a requirement for the applicant to notify these agencies if the application is to the commission. And then the second part of 8-3I is that if the zoning enforcement official is able to determine that it will not have an adverse effect on the public water supply, then the notice is not required. The question, in a sense, is when we have the green boxes in the watershed areas, I think we could presume that there haven't been any issues or concerns or complaints about these. But if we were to change these in a material way, could they be? And the issue is, I don't know. I think that gets into the realm of a legal question.
When you say we could have complaints, meaning?
I didn't mean to use the word complaint. The question is compliance with the statutory requirements.
I see. I remember we had a pretty lengthy discussion with the applicant and one of the other consultants about whether or not that issue of whether or not the zoning enforcement officer could say, as per 8-3I, whether the zoning enforcement officer can make that decision as to whether or not there might be an adverse impact or not, and they have the discretion to say, just send this up to RWA and DOH and whoever, and they have to make that decision, right? I remember we had that whole long back and forth.
So, apologies, am I muted or no?
Nope.
Okay.
I can hear you.
So, I guess the question is, and this is the circle and the potential conflict with that notification requirement. Your note below are potential additional, procedures that we could add that might address it. I guess it seems like there was a suggestion to add impervious coverage limits or limits on directly connected impervious areas. And is the theory there that if you're worried about those types of limits on impervious cover would sort of address your level of concern with a 2-family building, its size, its sort of overall sort of coverage of a lot area to not raise as significant concerns?
So, Chairman, excuse me for interrupting, but it's really not Mr. Felder's worry or concern. So really, I would just ask that you focus on clarifying questions, because it's really what the commission thinks, and to the extent that he can explain what is written here, that's one thing, but I would caution you against any sort of opining or anything that seems to be Mr. Chalder giving you his opinion. He gave you his opinion in the record, and so now I think, just as a reminder to everyone, just try to focus on clarifying questions, and then we can certainly point to where these things were discussed in the record.
Great. Thank you, Attorney. Appreciate that. And apologies, Mr. Chalder. What did you mean by that line, the TPC could add coverage limits?
I think 8-3I of the statutes is really a procedural requirement for the commission or somebody to notify these two agencies. The DPH would like to be notified in all scenarios. They do not want to be in the position of acting as a regulatory agency. Regional Water Authority, I believe, submitted some information that indicated that they had some consideration for things like impervious coverage, et cetera. I think as was indicated earlier, I think it might have been Jeff, had an opportunity to interact in a planning scenario. In a non-regulatory situation, we might get everybody to sit around a table in a non-COVID time as well and talk about where these thresholds are. We don't find ourselves in that situation right now. So 8.3i, again, and I'd urge you to get an input from Mary Ann on this, is a procedural requirement for notification. And it's almost binary. That's the notification is to be provided in a situation where there's an application to the commission in a public water supply watershed or aquifer protection area. But when the application no longer goes to the commission, it falls into the next part of the statute, which says that the zoning official has to make a determination that it will not have an adverse effect. I think the simple scenario is if it's a sign, I think the zoning official could perhaps reach a conclusion that it will not have an adverse effect on the public water supply and proceed on that basis. I think it starts to get a little bit more difficult beyond that.
So for our commission members, I think we can solve the 8.3i problem to the extent there is one by requiring any of these types of developments in the watershed area. They have to actually follow the procedure of notifying. And we could do that. Both the applicant has that obligation, but we can also, this gets at this question of whether we would approve these early over the counter without any of our commission involvement. And to me, it seems to suggest that this would lean towards us. We're going to allow for 2-family buildings to have them go through something that required our involvement, which would then trigger a requirement of notification of the Department of Public Health under 8.3i, unless I've totally confused that. Attorney Dubuque, if I confused.
Well, there's a statute involved, so you have no jurisdiction over the statute, but certainly you could have a process, as you mentioned, where you set forth in your regulations who needs to be notified and when, if you decide to have a process, other than the zoning permit process, which would be governed by 8.3i.
So I guess to the commission members, what I would be advocating for is that this is, because of this potential conflict with 8.3i, might be one that leans towards us having not just the zoning permit approval, but actually having our zoning commission involvement, which would then get us to the other part of 8.3i, which requires the referrals over. So I guess maybe I should step back a second. In this world of, are we interested in expanding the ability to have 2-family buildings in more of our zones?
Yes.
So I'm interested in that as well. Other commission members?
Rob, if we proceed, and maybe this is a question for the attorney, but if we proceed hypothetically with allowing more than single-family dwellings in any one zone as part of a as part of a shift in the applicant's proposal. Would the public be allowed to comment on this before it's voted on into our regs?
No, public hearing process is closed. No one gets to comment. The applicant doesn't get to comment. Attorney Herbst doesn't get to comment. The public does not get to comment. This is part of your decision-making ability.
So, am I understanding correctly that this note that Mr. Chelder adds at the bottom there, with the suggestion regarding 2 units, that if we were to allow it across zones, but add language that would add an impervious coverage limit on directly connected to impervious area to it. So we could have language that basically, if I'm characterizing it correctly, makes 8-3I a floor, right? And then we have some additional requirements about what you're suggesting is like notification if the parcel in question has X, Y, and Z, meaning if the parcel that's being applied for to put 2-family housing on has, depending on depending on the features of the land in question, or I assume it would actually be across if the applicant is seeking to put 2-family housing in the A1 zone or the A2 zone, then A3I sets a floor and we're adding some additional notification requirements. Am I understanding that correctly, Marianne?
Honestly, I didn't follow what you were saying. And so maybe can you walk through that a little more slowly? Because I
right. So I mean, I just reacquainted myself with 8-3I, right? And this whole question of notification requirements, meaning if an applicant comes in with a 2-family housing proposal for either of these 2 zones all the way in the far right of the table, A1 or A2, AWS parentheses 1 or A2, not A1 or A2, but A1 or AWS2, right? Those 2 columns where in Mr. Chelder's table, he's suggesting that if we allow a zoning permit to alleviate the issue of potential conflict with CGS 8-3I, we would add in language that says if you are coming to try and put a 2-family home in either of these 2 areas, then in addition to the regulations that exist, you also have to see what he says in the black. I'm just trying to interpret the language in black ink there at the very bottom correctly, for sort of like almost for the non-lawyer in me that's saying, what exactly does that mean for the developer? That means that they have to go and present their application to the zoning enforcement officer and say, yes, I believe I met all the requirements. I want to put it in one of those 2 zones, but I know there's more to it. Can you please explain it to me? And she says, yes, there is. Look, the zoning commission recently amended their regulations to add this. You have to not only, I make the decision as zoning enforcement officer as to whether or not to notify Regional Water Authority and Department of Public Health, but then this language in black, what exactly does that mean? TPZ could add impervious coverage limits. Okay, so she gets additional boxes she has to check off. Have you met the impervious coverage limit with your application? Okay, yes, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
I think if I may, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, I think 8-3I is a fairly straightforward procedural issue. I think the simple response is that if it comes to the commission, it has to be referred by the applicant to those two entities. Now the question is what happens if it doesn't come to the commission? DPH has not been explicit in their assessment. As part of my research work on your behalf, I contacted DPH. I said, listen, Woodbridge is already allowing a single family house with an accessory apartment. What if that was to be a single family house and a second house at 60% of AMI? Would you?
I'm just going to stop you there right now. Was that, or did you, or is that in one of your PowerPoint presentations?
I think I summarized the issues related to H3I as part of my PowerPoints.
No, I'm talking about the conversations with DPH, because if it wasn't, I'm going to stop you right there. No more. I don't recall hearing that about any conversations in the PowerPoint. So I would ask that you not relate any conversations, because I would like you to just stick to what's already been discussed. Even though the issue is in the record, I would prefer that you stick to just the documentation that's in the record also. So I think that the question here, I think part of the problem here, Yoni, is mixing the process with some of the potential additions. So that's what I think I understand the confusion here, because the A3I covers two types of processes. One, if the application goes to the TPZ, and one if it just goes to the ZEO. Right? That's the separation that you're talking about. And if it is to just go to the ZEO, your question, I think, was there could be additional regulations that the ZEO would have to consider, such that it would not have to come to the commission. Is that your question? You wouldn't have to have a different process. Is that what you're asking?
Right. Yeah. I mean, is my understanding, is that the correct understanding, is what I'm asking? Yeah.
Yoni, I think it is. I think it is an option. If we were down this road where we didn't want to have these types of two family units come in front of the commission, if we were in the world where it was just in front of Chris as a zoning enforcement officer, we could write in more guidance for Chris in her review, more boxes to check, more, sort of procedures that in order to get their approval from Chris, they would have to follow to make us feel more comfortable with just not seeing these and only having these go through Chris. That's one option. The other option is that we can require the two family buildings to come in front of the zoning commission, which would necessarily under A3I trigger they need an automatic referral over to public health because they've come to us. That's, I think, the way I view these last two boxes. The other thing to keep in mind, and I should have said this at the beginning, we only have currently an A zone. What Mr. Chalder has done is showed us the 6 different flavors of A zone that we have.
Right.
That A1 is the areas that are served in the A zone that are actually served by public sewer and public water. The A2 group, which is only 94 acres roughly, the A2 group is 263 acres of our town that are served by public sewer, but not public water. They have private wells. A similar amount, almost 290 acres, have public water, but private septic. And then the rest, the A4, then gets divided into these different groups. A4 is everyone who's on private septic and private wells. And there are 2 flavors of folks in the watershed areas, some of which have public water and some has only private wells and private septic. So just in essence, this gives us, if we wanted to fine tune our regulations to these 6 different flavors, we can view them. The things that you might allow more easily where there is public sewer and public water in the A zone versus things that might be more challenging because it's the A watershed 2 zone that has private septic, private wells, and is in the watershed. That's what this table is meant to sort of provide us with options. But so I'm glad we're actually going through this exercise, and we chose to do it on the 2-family sort of housing to try to get a sense. This, if we're heading down this road, and I want to also give sort of a time check and sort of get a test of people's stamina. We would, in essence, look at the 2 units per parcel option and decide, do we want to have expanded ability, which is in keeping with what the applicants want the ability to have 2 units everywhere in town. Do we want to expand the ability to have 2 units in some or all of the zones in town? And in so doing, do we want 2 family buildings with at least 1 unit at 60% AMI? Do we want just 2 family units to increase the diversity of housing stock, which in and of itself creates more housing opportunity? Or do we want some other flavor of that? This is kind of the exercise if we're heading down this road. And I want to just sort of pause, not on this specific question, to get a sense of people's willingness to keep going through this.
I feel like we're almost at the point of the law of diminishing returns.
All for tonight or for in general?
No, for tonight.
Yeah, I get a sense we're feeling that as well.
Great.
Right. So I do, but I think so. This is illustrative, and so let's shift to kind of how we will approach our next work session on this topic, when we want to have that. Do we think we need a special meeting, or do you think we can do this all at our next meeting, which is we would have to come to a decision by then?
Chairman Klee, may I suggest that you have a special meeting because, there was, again, it was an extensive record. There should be a written motion based on your discussions that pulls everything together that you'll have before you at your June meeting, so you can go through it and really make sure that everyone's on the same page and so forth. So I think it would be more productive to try and perhaps work with this framework, everyone in their own heads kind of wrap their arms around the framework if this is the direction that you're going in. And then when you come back next time, you can see where the points of agreement are and start to fine tune where you want to go.
So I do think that is the right suggestion, which would involve kind of us each sort of sitting down and wrestling with this and starting filling in those sort of boxes of where you each feel sort of comfortable based on what you've seen in the record, based on what's been presented, where you would see places for improved, changed housing types. I was going to stop sharing the screen if that's okay with folks. I want to pull up my calendar. Is that a reasonable? I think we do need a special meeting where we will dive into these options in each of our zones and sort of dedicate, I guess, an hour or two to that sometime in the next few weeks. You want to have any suggestions on when to do that?
Mr. Chairman, I would just note that the third Monday of the month, I do chair another land use board in another town, and I cannot be available that evening.
So that would be you are unavailable the 17th.
Correct. There is no meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals next Monday, so that's an option. Or the 24th. Or any other day that you guys want to meet.
Do we know the answer to the question yet as to whether the regularly scheduled meeting in June is within or without or outside the 65-day window?
Mr. Chairman, it is within your 65-day window.
Okay, so that will be our last possible day. I guess the question is, do we want to aim for the week of the 10th or the week of the 17th, but not the 17th?
Chris, you said you were unavailable the third Monday or the fourth Monday? I'm sorry.
The third Monday.
So Chris can't do it the Monday the 17th, but,
Okay.
but the week of the 17th, we could find it Wednesday, Thursday.
Well, actually, the 19th, I have wetlands here in Woodbridge. Sorry, I'm a busy person.
So not the 17th, not the 19th.
Yep.
I'm good the 10th for sure. I'm just going one day at a time.
Other commission members?
The 10th is fine with me, and the 18th is fine with me.
Well,
Attorney Dubuque and Mr. Chalder.
Unfortunately, the only day that I cannot make is the 18th. I have another commitment that I just cannot change.
That's okay. Like the 10th.
Hey Rob, should we meaning you or Chris, should we check in with Larry? I mean, regarding this, not only his safety and welfare.
I can check tomorrow. I don't know that I'd try to call him now.
Yeah, I think we need to try to get it. We have to get a date on the calendar now, and hopefully it does work for Larry. Mr. Chalder, is the 10th.
Fortunately, no, Mr. Chairman. I have a public hearing on adoption scheduled elsewhere that night. So next week I have Thursday the 13th and Tuesday the 18th, Wednesday the 19th, which I think wasn't available, and Thursday the 20th. Any of those dates could work. I apologize.
What about Thursday the 13th? What do we say about that?
Thursday the 13th, Andrew.
any evening is the same for me.
Looks like Paul has his calendar up on the wall behind him.
Oh no, that's my wife's. But thanks for noticing, Yoni.
The Thursday the 13th, I could do more easily at 7 instead of 6:30, if that's possible.
Me as well. I've got a commitment that I would start on the phone, but yeah, that I could do 7. I'm better to do 7.
Chris, how does that align with our other town meetings?
We have on board tonight a young gentleman who's helping to cover for PUA. So I think we're okay in getting public viewing. So PUA is not here tonight because she's got another obligation in Bethany. But I believe we'll have coverage.
So it looks like Thursday the 13th at 7 o'clock. With a goal of probably budget till 9 o'clock. Okay, I'm seeing nods. I think that's so. Attorney Dubuque, do we need to do anything formally on that regard, or we're just in workshop session and continuing this work session until Thursday the 13th at 7 o'clock in a special meeting for this purpose?
You don't need to continue the meeting. Whenever you want to hold the meeting, it's fine. You don't need to vote like you would with a public hearing continuation. That's a little bit more of a formal process, but
okay.
They just need to be posted as usual, and Chris ably takes care of all of that.
She sure does. So for our commission members for that Thursday, 7 o'clock, and we'll kind of continue doing what we sort of did a little toe in the water taste of today, kind of going through Mr. Chalder's framework, kind of working through our views on what the applicant presented and whether there are reasonable alterations and adjustments that we'd like to put forward instead. And so I think everyone taking a little time with that framework and the documents and in the record on your own individually, and then coming for those discussions on Thursday the 13th at 7. Sound good? All right, really appreciate folks, and thank you to Mr. Chalder. We'll see you on the 13th, and Attorney Dubuque, thank you as well. I think we'll end that part of our meeting and transition to a little housekeeping before we sign off today, if folks can bear with us for another 5-10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. I think, did we have any reports, Andrew, from Scrog?
No, there was no meeting last month.
That is efficient and quick. Nice to get back to that normal mode of our operations. Efficient and quick. Chris, any reports from our zoning enforcement officer?
No. Been pretty quiet. We did. My work is proceeding over at the high school. I've been over there a couple times just to look at it. And erosion-wise, there's no issues. So.
Great. Thank you for that update. We have a bunch of minutes for approval. Have folks had a chance to take a look at those? Jeff?
Sure. I'm not sure, Chris, did you send us the January 4 minutes?
No, not the regular meeting, no.
So that didn't come out, right? So, very good. All right. So I read the February 1 minutes that was adjourned to February 9. It looked okay to me. I read the February 22nd reviewed that, looked all right as well. March 1st, there was a small non-material typo. I can send that to you, Chris, but it's not material, but I read that, looked all right. March 18th looked okay as well, read that. On April 5, I think Chairman Schatz did show up at some point to the meeting after it started, and I don't think you noted that in the minutes. Is that correct?
I don't know. I'd have to look at them.
Okay, so that would be a change that I would make. I think Chairman Schatz was late, but he arrived at the meeting, so maybe we could reflect that.
I think you meant Secretary Schatz.
Yes.
Switched.
Chris, those two or those three comments. Otherwise, I would motion that these minutes should be accepted.
All right, it's been moved. Does anyone have a second?
I will second it.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion on approving the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor of approving them, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Jeff, for the careful read. So those meeting minutes are approved. Was there any other business? Because I've lost my
Agenda.
Yeah.
I had one question. Did the brewery applicants remove their application fully?
They withdrew their application, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Anything else on the agenda that I still can't find? Hearing none, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. None opposed. Thank you all. Really appreciate all your effort and commitment. And we'll be back at this again on the 13th. So we'll see you then.